Welcome to Android Dialogues, where we have bite-sized conversations with people in the Android community. I'm Huyen and I'm speaking with
Hadi Hariri.
We're currently in San Francisco for KotlinConf. Hadi, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. It's great.
Where are you based? And well, I'll ask the question anyway, because hopefully some of you know Hadi already. But let me ask the usual questions. Where are you based, and how did you get into Android?
So I'm based in Spain. I live in Malaga, which is the south of Spain. It's sunny most year round. And how did I get into Android? I'm not into Android, but that doesn't mean that I can't be on this show, right?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Hadi, what do you do actually? So in case people don't recognize you or know.
Yeah, so I'm in the Developer Advocacy at JetBrains. So essentially what we do is help people adopt our tools, whether that's Kotlin or some of our IDEs. So it's mostly around training, education, and things like that. So we do conferences, we do tutorials, docs, and a whole bunch of different things. It's mostly just around getting people to use things better.
When I first asked Hadi to do this, I kind of told him that I felt like he was Android by osmosis, because in the Android community we're obviously very familiar with JetBrains through IntelliJ and Android Studio. And of course, the topic of our discussion today, Kotlin, which you can actually kind of tell from Hadi's shirt here. Hadi, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how did you become, I guess, VP of Developer Advocacy at JetBrains?
Yeah, I mean, so I started at JetBrains about 8 years ago, and I used to help them a little bit at conferences. So they would call me because I used to, I was a real passionate of their tools, well, our tools now, which one of them was Resharper, which was in the .NET space. And so they used to come and sometimes say, hey, can you come and help us at the booth or whatever? And so I started to do that. And because I had already, I've been speaking for 15, 16 years plus, I just kind of, they offered this role of, hey, do you want to maybe do this full time? And I said, why not? And that was about 8 years ago, and I'm still there and loving it. So when I joined, it was just one person, and now we're a team of, I think, around 10.
In your job, and how do you, I guess, in a sense, advocate for technology and do the education while seeming kind of maintaining credibility? How do you present a face where it's not that just you drinking the Kool-Aid and that's like your job to push something forward, but how do you maintain credibility and I guess accessibility as a developer advocate?
Yeah, and I think that's a good question. It's a hard question. It's a hard job because if you lose your credibility, you've basically lost it all. You've lost credibility for yourself. You've lost credibility for your company. So one of the big factors of our job is to continuously not only be learning but doing, right? So a good portion of our time is dedicated, like in my specific case, I'm mostly now doing Kotlin. So a lot of my time is spent just writing Kotlin code, working with Kotlin, learning about new Kotlin features and things. So you need to do, and if you don't do, you will never be able to help others, right? So we try and make sure that we're always doing things on the team, and we've got internal projects. I work on a couple of internal projects at JetBrains. We've got open source projects that we're working on, and the same goes for the rest of the team, whether they're doing Kotlin or PhpStorm, Developer Advocacy, or IntelliJ. They're using the tool on a daily basis. So it's about just and at the end of the day, if you are helping people, our goal isn't to push things down people's throats. Our goal is to say, we've got these tools, we've got this language, we love it, we believe in it, and we think that it can help you. Here's how we think it can help you. Then you take that and say, well, it does or it doesn't. It's up to them to decide, really. And
to the point of you doing things, I think one thing that's really awesome, I've seen several of your talks, is that you actually are a live coder. So in fact, you put out you're doing very forefront when you present. So actually, and if you ever get a chance to see Hadi present, you should, because he's kind of taking that dangerous dive into live coding, which is always awesome to see. And I think is again, I guess to your point, it kind of connects you with the technology and shows that the expertise and kind of but also connects the audience with whatever you're doing, and I think is a great way of instructing. So
yeah, and I mean we have one of the hardest customers in the world in a sense, right? Because developers, right?
Yes, that is very true. We're a tough bunch.
Exactly, so and I don't, it's not about, I'm not going to say PR or marketing, but we don't tolerate that to a certain extent. So you can't take that approach. You have to really, it's about proving the value that you provide and then giving the choice, I think.
So speaking as an Android developer, and I guess from the perspective of many in the community, it seems like Kotlin, so we'll switch over to Kotlin again. It seems like Kotlin almost kind of appeared the last couple of years for many of us. Like it seems like this, so in our community, it's definitely a very new, trendy, kind of hot topic. And what people might not realize is that Kotlin's been around for quite some time. I think it was born like about 7 years ago.
Yeah, we started around 2010, I think, and then we made the first public announcement around 2011. And then we released in 2016, 1.0, so it was around 6 years until we actually did a first release. So it's been around a long time.
Yeah, can you give us actually a little more of a history lesson, like a quick history lesson on kind of the development of Kotlin from that first kind of, I guess, engendering of the idea in 2010 to, I guess, like first release in 2016 and kind of the amazing craziness of a lot of stuff that's been happening this year?
Yeah, so initially, I mean, we started Kotlin with the idea that, you know, we write a lot of Java code and we wanted to ease some things for ourselves, you know, just like you do in the Android development community. And so we looked at the candidates at that time and we thought, well, you know, there's Scala, there's some other things, but Scala had issues with performance. It was slow. We found Scala that could lead to a little bit too much complexity. And we say this from a perspective of we actually make plugins for Scala, right? So and you know, it's got good usage, and but it's not easy to tool Scala. So we kind of said, okay, well, let's try and build a language and use this language. And of course, we didn't do Android development, right? And we really don't do Android development now either. I mean, we got some apps, but we don't really do it, right? It's not our main, you know, product line. So we started with developing this, and you know, we released it, announced it, and what was the reaction? Everyone's like, "Why would you want another programming language?" But we persisted, you know, despite this. Why would you? We continued, and then gradually people started to adopt it in the early milestone phases, which was like, you know, we used to call them milestones. I think we had like 7 or 8 milestones before we went for I can't remember. And then at some point, you know, in relevance to your, you know, to the Android community, I think many of us believe that, and you can confirm or deny this, but I think many of us believe that a turning point in Android was when Jake Wharton from Square wrote this amazing long document, which if you still click on it, says that, wow, your document seems popular. Because a lot of people that I've got the podcast Talking Kotlin thing, and everyone I talk to, they're like, yeah, I read this doc by Jake. And so I think that was kind of like, oh, you know, Jake's looking at this, we should look at this. And then that started to pick up a little bit.
That happens a lot in the Android community, by the way. All respect to Jake and other people in the community. That tends to happen a lot. Yeah. People probably know who Jake is, by the way.
So he's this guy.
This is some guy, just some developer. I think he does Android.
And then, so then, you know, we eventually got to the release at 2016. Then we released 1.1 in 2017, and it was amazing the growth that we've seen in the last year, even before the whole Google I/O announcement. Like from 2016 to 2017, since the 1.0 release, there's been tremendous growth in terms of Kotlin adoption.
Are there any other factors that you see from your perspective and from your end that kind of helped Kotlin to take off? Because, you know, in the Android community, rather, you know, I think there's been a lot of efforts to drive like alternate languages like Scala. There's been cross-platform solutions like Xamarin and React Native, but I think it's fair to say that no other language or no other kind of third-party platform has taken off in the way that Kotlin has, and hasn't become as mainstream among native developers as Kotlin has. What do you think are the other factors that kind of led to this like adoption, this kind of crazy year?
I think it's the same principle that we have at JetBrains, right? I mean, we created Kotlin because we had some pain points ourselves, right? And we're concentrating on trying to relieve those pain points, like we do with our other tools. Right? And of course, it wasn't about here's this new shiny thing, and why don't you go ahead and use it? Because people then say, yeah, but what about all of the old, not, you know, rusty stuff that I have? What am I going to do with all of that, right? So in addition to trying to fix problems, we focus a lot on the interop and on the ability to use your existing things and not have to throw everything away. And I think that these two things the fact that, you know, the language works seamlessly with what you have. You don't need to wait for a new entire ecosystem to come about. And, you know, we're trying to iron out all of those little flaws that there might be. This is, I believe that, in my perspective, is helping with the adoption, right? It's not a completely new paradigm and way of thinking or anything.
Well, I definitely, speaking from my experience, I think as part of a team that has like integrated Kotlin into our daily lives, it definitely has been valuable. Like, it's really great to learn something and still be able to fall back when you need to, either from either comfort or because you've got a big code base, you can't change everything all at once, and to have that ability to kind of switch between the two and learn while still maintaining, you know, good production code. It's been a good experience, and I think that is very compelling, and it has been, at least for us, a good reason for us to kind of be able to jump into Kotlin. So that's really great. So do you have like a favorite feature or favorite part of Kotlin?
So I come from C#, right? You know, for the vast majority of my past 7 or 8 years, I've been doing C#, and I love the succinctness of some of the things in Kotlin, like extension functions, I love. Extension properties, I love. These are, for me, probably some of the favorite features in the sense in terms of Kotlin. But again, like, and I say this a lot of times, like, you know, if you look at Kotlin, it feels like a bag of, like, I can't describe Kotlin as a bag of features, you know, because it's more about when you put all of these features together, that experience, I think. And so I wouldn't say like I've got a favorite feature. It's just accumulation of all of them. But if you hold it, you know, put me against the wall, I will say that it's probably extension functions. I really like that.
Let me ask you, is there a feature or something that you feel people haven't quite looked at closely enough yet, or something that you would really, really want people to try and give feedback on? Just maybe like a hidden gem in a sense. Not that there's too much hidden in Kotlin. There's a lot of documentation and people are kind of doing Kotlin everywhere, but is there something that you'd love people to use more? I
would love people, and myself and Andre and the team, we would love people to use more coroutines.
I think I might have heard you ask about coroutines a few times.
And I think, you know, we keep debating internally that was using the term experimental the wrong word for coroutines because it sends the wrong message. But coroutines really, like experimental, we mean with that there might be some changes, but if there are, we will fix it for you. Like we will provide you the upgrade, the migration path and everything. But we would love to get more feedback on coroutines.
Could you actually, for anyone who hasn't heard of coroutines, explain quickly what they are?
Yeah, so essentially the idea there is that, you know, when you're doing asynchronous programming, you have to use certain paradigms, right? So you have to use either callbacks, where you end up in what they call callback hell, because it's callback after callback after callback, and then you get like the tilted Christmas tree. Or you can use some different mechanisms, like in C# you have the sync await keyword and stuff like that. And in the Android world, I guess that many people are familiar with RX, right? Yes. So RX Java, right? But when you look at RX, you go from the normal kind of paradigm to, they say to you, you know, everything is an observable, everything is a stream and it's observable. And that moment is kind of like, what did you just say to me? But it's a shift, right? It's a different way of writing code. And with coroutines, what we're trying to do is basically leave you with your original paradigm of how you would kind of like write imperative, top-down code, synchronous code, and kind of under the covers provide you with that asynchronous model and the ability to do concurrent programming, etc. And it's not a new concept. You know, coroutines have been around since the 70s, and certain languages have them implemented. So we've just kind of introduced that way of doing asynchronous programming.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I feel like, you know, when we first started Android development, like you said, we kind of were very light on like certain mechanisms, maybe async task and things like that. And then at some point, RxJava came in, and then we all kind of ran to the other side of the ship and tried to learn this new way to do things. And now, in a sense, I think you're right. Some people may not know exactly what coroutines are, but also there's a sense of like, do I have to run back to the other side of the ship now? I mean, like I already just converted everything to RxJava, but I mean, but at the same time, I feel like there's still some people that aren't quite doing RxJava yet or haven't converted everything. So it sounds like coroutines might be something that you want to take a look at least for Hadi.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, it's like anything that I say, like, don't switch from RX to coroutines just because everyone might be or will in 6 months do coroutines. This is about, what value is it going to add for you? And if you're very comfortable with RX and if you're happy with that way of development, you can continue with that. And of course, there is a possibility of combining the two. There are places where you could use coroutines and places where you can use RX.
Is there anything else about Kotlin in general that people may not know? Not necessarily a feature, but just something interesting about Kotlin that you'd like people to know? That's a good question. I think one of the features that I think probably people don't know about much, which is also scary if they find out a little bit about it, is that Kotlin actually has like a plugin architecture model. The compiler, you can plug in things to the compiler, which allows you to, in a sense, change the behavior of the language. So examples of this are, the Android extensions, so you can get the static typing. So that's done with the compiler architecture, right? So that kind of like intercepts the compiler and adds all of this. And we've taken that to another, used it in other places, like for example with Spring and Spring Boot. You use IOC frameworks, and IOC frameworks require classes to be open. Right.
In Kotlin, they're not. So you end up in a situation where now I've got my entire code base decorated with open. So we've added a plugin for Gradle, etc., which says, okay, now your class can be open without you having to be explicit about this. Now that's a lot of powerful things.
It
right?
sounds powerful, but very
delicate. Right? Yeah, it's kind of, and people say to me, hey, is there documentation on this? I'm like, no, because then it goes to the level of, oh, you know what? I want to add this feature to the language, and I want to add this feature. And that's pretty, not the direction that I think we should go. That's
really fascinating. I feel like that was a very, that seemed like a very kind of serious decision to make, because in a sense, and I feel like I've listened to quite a few talking podcasts, and I love hearing about this story from Andre and things. And it seems like Kotlin is developed in a very judicious, pragmatic way, and it feels like making a decision like that to have plugins feels like opening Pandora's box. And I think in a way it's great to give other people the power to, I guess, play with the language and the compiler that way, but it feels like it could almost blow up in your face, I guess.
Yeah, but
that's a better way of putting it.
But the thing is that I think it's I think credit to Andre, because it's very hard to find this balance and to keep that idea of that. What is our goal with Kotlin? It is about solving people's pain points. It's about solving issues. It's about making the language enjoyable. It's about removing ceremony. So you have to find something that you can try and balance, and at the same time not make the language overly complex. So it's definitely not easy. I wouldn't want to be in his shoes making these decisions.
So I wanted to go back to something that you mentioned earlier about how you feel like what you like about Kotlin is kind of like the whole experience. And so just to give a quick context on what I'm about to ask. So I started off in uni doing C and C++, and I think in uni I kind of learned about object-oriented programming as the pinnacle of programming, this is how you do things. And then, as I progressed in my career, I learned Java, and then just to go back, I learned about ArcsJava, so I learned about more reactive way of doing things, and started to learn a little bit about this thing called functional programming. And now that, in my last year of doing Kotlin, I feel like maybe when you're someone like me who's maybe done a lot of mostly object-oriented programming, came from C++, Java background, it kind of progresses okay, for your first day of Kotlin, you convert a file and you try to remove all the null assertion operators, and you try to figure out how to make your Java code work in Kotlin. And then you do it for a few more months, and you learn how to use when, apply, and let, and run in certain ways. You learn how to do delegates, and you learn more of these features that are more kind of, you try to be more idiomatic. And then now, I think for me at least, I'm trying to really wrap my head around functional programming. And it feels like there's this thread throughout Kotlin, in a sense, where it's not just a new syntax, it's not just, again, like you said, removing pain points and making things cleaner, more readable, but also this kind of, there feels like there's functional programming core inside that now I feel like if I really want to take advantage of Kotlin, that I need to think in a different way. How do you address that challenge of educating people at different levels and getting awareness about Kotlin, not just from a syntax and feature, but also kind of this kind of approach?
Yeah. I try and again focus it on the approach of I don't want to show you a feature. I want to show you how this feature can provide you with value, right? So if you take a look at, like, I've been through the same experience as you. You know, I had to do software engineering at university, and there was like 1 year of object-oriented programming, right? And then as you gradually move into languages that, you know, you could call functional languages. I subscribe to Eric Meyer's approach to this, which is, you know, any language that treats functions as first-class citizens, right? And Kotlin obviously does. So you start to actually see that there are some things that, again, it goes back to ceremony, right? You know, I'm doing a whole bunch of things with an object where actually the object is not providing me much value, right? I don't know if you've read this article. It's very good. It's called Verbs in the Kingdom of Nouns, right? And it talks about how, you know, we've got these objects that are essentially just holding behavior, right? And there isn't really much state, right? Because, and if you think about your classes, you from one side you have data classes, which are basically DTOs, data transfer objects, right? And then from the other side, often you end up with classes that aren't combining data with functions, with behavior. It's just holding behavior, right? And no state. So you kind of wonder, like, why am I doing this? And if you look at the Gang of Four design patterns, a lot of the design patterns, such as like the strategy pattern or the template pattern or all of these things, they actually can be reduced to functions. So why, you know, I can get rid of all of this ceremony, I can get rid of all this extra typing if I just focus as treating functions as first-class behavior. So I think that there is that step with Kotlin where you start to try and go from what you know, which is Java, to using Kotlin in a Java-esque way. And then from there, you start to say, okay, well, maybe I can refactor this and remove some ceremony, remove some noise, and oh, look, that just becomes a function. And maybe I could just move that into start to create more functions. And of course, you know, one of the benefits of functional programming is that when you start to remove state, you get deterministic behavior, right? Every time you call the function, you're always going to get the same function, because essentially the idea is that there isn't any side effects, right? So when you remove state, there's nowhere really to keep these side effects. So I think it's a phased approach. And the way that I picked up on functional programming was, yeah, okay, if I get rid of this, it will actually cut down noise and it'll provide me with some benefits. And I try and show the same way, like, how is it going to benefit you? And many years ago, I did this talk back before Kotlin was really well known, which was called Refactoring to Functional, and I think there's a bunch of videos of it out there. And it's basically going through a whole bunch of design patterns and a whole bunch of things that we do with object-oriented programming, and saying, here's how you can do it just using functions in a cleaner way.
I think ceremony is actually now my favorite word, and I actually saw a talk by Venkat Subramaniam, and he kind of focuses on things from a awesome. And he did this, I think it was like functional programming in the light of lambdas, and again, it's like those kind of words, like understanding it as ceremony and about noise and things like that. It kind of, that's what is the stuff that has made it click for me. Yeah. So, but it still feels like a process. It's just so not typical. I feel like so many of us went to uni and learned like very imperative style.
They lied to us.
It's like I had to learn everything over again. But I feel like Kotlin presents a really good opportunity. I mean, to learn these new things, and like to credit to Java 8 as well with streams and things like that. It feels like we're getting to a point where we can fix past mistakes and learn that imperative is not the only way to do things. But so I wanted to kind of take a step back and talk about the Kotlin community, because I feel like a big part of what has been enjoyable about learning Kotlin and taking this dive into a whole new language has been the community. And I think that it's not just, say, developers talking to each other in Slack or anything like that, but also that there's been a lot of collaboration, both between developers, but also with JetBrains and developers. It really feels like JetBrains takes feedback and responds to that feedback very well, not just in like Slack, but also I believe like the Keep, which is the Kotlin evolution and enhancement process. Yeah. And it feels like all of that feels like, again, that we're working kind of with JetBrains, I think, in this whole process. How do you see us maintaining this kind of good, hopefully good community and this good collaboration, like as a community, both as developers ourselves and with JetBrains?
I think it'll stay the same. And first of all, thank you for those words. But really, it is the essence, and we strongly believe, and we were actually discussing this the other day with Max. That the community, that for a language to become popular, it needs to have a community around it. It needs to have people that are writing code, that are promoting it, that are educating others, that are doing experiments. So for us, the community is the core, right? And we know that we need to continue to grow the community, continue to listen to the community, because it's the essence of it, right? Because when we released Kotlin, the first time, as I said to you, is like, why are you doing this, right? But then we started to make decisions, and these decisions started to become validated by the community, and it's playing a core part of it. So I don't see any of that changing. Really, I don't. Obviously, like now, for instance, before Google I/O, we had, I think, something around 6,000 people on Slack. Mm-hmm. Now we've got nearly 13,000 people on Slack. Yeah. So it's not maintainable in the sense that we can be there to respond to everything. But even now, a lot of folks from the JetBrains team are hanging out on Slack and still helping people. But then encouraging, and there's other people in the community that are starting to help, right? Mm-hmm. So that is just, I think I don't believe that that's going to change, right? We want to continue down that path.
So it feels like kind of like a core of your approach and your whole philosophy.
It is, right? It's the community has given us great ideas. The community has validated our ideas and sometimes told us, nope, you've screwed up. Like, the typical example of interop. Initially with the nulls and the interop, it took a couple of events to get it right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So.
Well, engineers love telling other engineers when they screwed up. So,
no, really? I've never experienced that in my life.
So I guess just to give people a lay of the land, because maybe if y'all haven't heard, there is actually an official Kotlin Slack community. What does the landscape of the Kotlin community look like? If people want to participate and tell you where you screwed up.
So Hadi at JetBrains.com. The screw ups keep private. So yeah, there is the Slack. There's been a tremendous number of user groups that have grown. Like again, before Google I/O, we were 45. Now we're about 120. There are user groups pretty much everywhere now. Then some of the user groups organize what they call the Kotlin Nights, which is kind of like a community-driven events that we started, and then we kind of gave the framework for the community to take over. There's obviously the Kotlin forums, and there is where a lot of the developers are on. And then, of course, the Keep, right, which is where we put out proposals of how we want to address things and then get feedback on GitHub, which is where it's all at.
There's been a lot of really crazy things, wonderful things happening in 2017. As I kept saying, it's a crazy year. So sorry again, 1.1, first book, Kotlin in Action. First conference, which we are here for, KotlinConf.
Sold out.
Sold out. And also, I think it was like the first public preview of Kotlin Native as well this year?
I believe.
Was it?
No, we had an earlier one, but it's been picking up steam quite a bit now. Yeah.
And let me see, what else? I have a list. Let me see, but also...
Coroutines, I think we kind of did. That experimental thing.
Right, that experimental thing that Hadi would really, really like you to try. And let me see, and also this little thing of Kotlin becoming a first-party supported language on Android, small thing. In your wildest or most fevered dream, what do you see for Kotlin in the future after this great year? I'm really interested in the native stuff. Yeah. Really interested. So I'm loving, I really am eager to see where we take that. And KotlinConf is something that we started a year ago. I've been heavily involved in, and I'm really excited about it, see where that goes, and hopefully we can repeat that as well. And then just continue to grow, and especially, and I know this is Android community that's listening, but for us, more growth outside of Android as well is something that we really want, and we're starting to get that, right? We're starting to get a lot of growth around the server side and other areas and the web. Thank you so much, Hadi, for chatting with us today. If people wanted to find you on the internet, where can they do that? Twitter is Hariri, so that's HHARIRI. I think so. It's okay. We'll put it on like a little banner that we write. So I'm on Twitter, and then email Hadi at JetBrains. Easiest. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Hadi. Thank you. And thank you all, and we'll see you next time. Bye.